Thank you everyone for joining our October ODOT Safe Routes to School monthly webinar. Today we are joined by a panel who are going to be speaking on some adaptive PE and adaptive physical education sports practices. We'll go ahead and be getting started. My name is Emily Dugan. I work for Commute Options, but I'm a part of the technical assistance provider team with ODOT, also planning and design, Cycle Oregon, and the Street Trust. And we host these monthly webinars to help you develop your programming. The purpose for today is to understand the needs of students with disabilities in accessing adaptive PE and adaptive sports. Our hope today is that through our expert panel, you will learn some lessons that you can bring into your Safe Routes programming to begin focusing on accessibility. And I'll talk more about this at the end of our webinar today, but next month, in place of our regular monthly webinars, we have a half-day equity and accessibility training. So this will be a good webinar to start, spurring some of those questions, getting some ideas flowing about what you would like to take away from that training. So with that, I'm going to go over our agenda. First, I will introduce our wonderful panel speakers. Then we'll go into a moderated Q&A. I've prepared some questions for them. Then finally, we'll open it up to the audience Q&A. If during the moderated Q&A you have any, thank you, disability and accessibility. Thank you, I appreciate that. If you have questions during the moderated Q&A, please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to those. And finally, we'll end with some resources and announcements. So with that, I'm going to take a moment to introduce our speakers, and I do apologize, I'm reading off a paper, so bear with me. First, we have Dr. Megan MacDonald. Megan is a PhD professor of kinesiology, the early childhood research core director at the Hallie E. Ford Center for Children and Families, and the OSU Impact for Life faculty scholar. All of this is housed within the College of Health at Oregon State University. Her vision is that every child is active and accepted. Megan works to achieve her passion by conducting high quality research, teaching and outreach focused on youthful activities for all people. Her research has been published in high-impact academic journals and is supported through organizations like the National Institutes of Health and the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. She disseminates her ideas to the public through various mechanisms, including op-eds featured in the U.S. News and World Report, The Hill, and the Los Angeles Times. Then we have Kirsten French, who is here with us from the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes. Kirsten is the program director where she oversees Camp Stark and sports adaptation teams, plans, implements, and directs 7 sessions of camp year-round, writes and manages grants, and provides professional development webinars, such as this one, and opportunities through sports adaptations to bring resources to all. So that's a lot of hats that you're wearing, Kirsten. Appreciate you being here. Next, we have Dr. Andy Pitchford. Andy is the assistant professor of kinesiology in the College of Health at Oregon State University. Andy's research focuses on the interaction of motor development, physical activity, and health outcomes in individuals with developmental disabilities across the lifespan. This work is applied through designing and testing interventions for individuals with developmental disabilities to establish evidence-based practices. He also partners with the Special Olympics International to directly serve individuals with developmental disabilities, train students and healthcare workers to effectively work with these individuals, and to conduct health research on this population. Thank you, Andy. And finally, we have Donaca. Did I say your name correctly? I apologize. Yes, okay, great. I should have checked that first. Anne is the founder and director of Bike First PDX, which helps people of all ages achieve the childhood dream of independent bicycling. In addition to this, she also has the demanding schedule of being the vice principal of the Multnomah Learning Academy, and also handles fundraising, community advocacy, customizes skills for the clinics held at Bike First. And she's also today joined by her son, Cody. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and we'll go ahead and start with the panelist Q&A. And to kick things off, first, I would just like to ask all of our panelists to take a moment to introduce themselves, tell us anything more that maybe I missed, and tell us about your passion and interest in disability advocacy. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Andy, because you're the first person I see on my screen.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me. Andy Pitchford, as was mentioned. I'm an assistant professor at Oregon State in kinesiology, and also part of our Masters of Adapted Physical Education program, where we're training teachers to serve students with disabilities in physical education in the state of Oregon as well as across the country. And I come from that background. I was actually trained here at Oregon State in that program. I've taught in the public schools in physical education and adapted physical education, and then for the last, I don't know, was it 10 or 15 years, have been doing things at the higher education level with a focus on research related to the health of people with disabilities and trying to increase the opportunities that are available to engage in play, to engage in physical activity that's able to promote positive trajectories of health. And that happens across the lifespan from infants to older adults.
Great, thank you so much. Next, I'm going to go to Anne and Cody.
Thanks for having us here. Cody, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, so it's me is Cody. I'm be a Down syndrome. I did graduate at Korea, at Grant. I'm still coaching at Grant football. I'm watching at Oregon Ducks fans and watching the games.
Coach basketball.
Yeah, coaching basketball and coaching football.
Thank you. So Cody was the first person with Downs in the state of Oregon to graduate from university, and he loves coaching, loves sports. He was our motivation for starting Bike First 18 years ago. And it is for individuals, mainly children and youth with disabilities, to learn the skills needed to ride a typical bike. And we've partnered with Safe Routes to Schools for pretty much all of those years. It's been an amazing partnership. And my passion for working with people with disabilities, being a strong advocate of all marginalized populations, obviously comes from my son Cody. And it really is just a lens that I look through in all realms of life now. The school that I teach at, I love because we're fully inclusive. So we have push-in services. There are no segregated classrooms. And Cody is a good example of what happens with independence when you give people the opportunity to thrive in a healthy way.
Thank you both so much for joining us today. Kirsten, I'm going to throw it to you next.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Kirsten French, and I'm the programs manager of our Camp Spark and Sports Adaptations programs at the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes. Through these programs, I work in person throughout Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, and virtually across the U.S. and internationally to ensure that all students with visual impairments have access to their community sports, their school sports, and their PE in their classrooms. An overwhelming majority of youth with visual impairments are excluded from their PE classrooms and their after school or extracurricular sports, not because of their own abilities, but because of a lack of resources, lack of knowledge, and a lot of discrimination against individuals with visual impairments. With very straightforward and oftentimes very minor adaptations, students with visual impairments can be fully included in each of these sports and physical activities. And as we all would agree, there's a huge impact that sports and physical activity has on all of our lives, not just from a physical sense, but in so many areas. And students with visual impairments have the right to this access in the same way as their sighted peers. I myself am also blind and am a guide dog user, nightly sleeping behind me, and know the impact that sports and physical activity has had on my own life and friends' lives, and want to ensure that this is something that all students with visual impairments have access.
Thank you, Kirsten. And then Megan will finish this portion with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I think like Kirsten shared, for me, physical activity has just been such a really important part of my life for as long as I can remember, and having access to it and being included is a really important piece of that. And so I think sort of my passion for adaptive physical activity stems from some of my personal experiences. Like Andy, I have also been in higher education, I think for 16 plus years now. And some of the original work that I did as a graduate student was really focused on teaching children with developmental disabilities how to ride a two-wheeled bike. And that was really an instrumental research project in my academic career, but also more personally, I think, as Anne mentioned, that idea of independence, that piece of it was also really important, and something that I still think about as I continue to work in various areas in adaptive physical activity. Thank you.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. We're going to go ahead and get started with this first question here. What are some of the common challenges that you see students with disabilities facing in a PE or physical movement-based setting? And Megan, I'm going to pass it to you because you just spoke. So, and feel free to jump in, wherever you.
Thanks. So yeah, in thinking about this question, and then we got some of these questions in advance, so it gave us a chance to think about this. So for me, we really focus and teach on the social model of disability. And so when I think about this, it's really the environment, and I think about that more holistically, both physically and often the people that are included in it, that might be more of an issue for inclusion. So I don't think it's challenges of the students. I think it's challenges of the environment sometimes that those students are entering. So I think some of that's just shifting that mindset a little bit. I'm sure others have more to add to that.
This is Kirsten speaking, and for youth with visual impairments, it's typically broken down into 3 categories of why that there's a lack of access. It can be from a lack of knowledge of the educator or coach, where it's, I want to include this person, I have all of the desire to do that, I just don't know how to do that. It can be a lack of equipment, that while the equipment is not hugely different or significant for access for students with visual impairments, but it is different, making sure that it is audible. Or is it a high contrast color? Is it a different size? Something that is it a tandem bike, for example, when we think specifically about biking, but making sure sometimes there isn't that access. And a lot of times that cost is a significant barrier. And finally, and unfortunately, this still largely exists in so many areas, there's a huge bias of, what's the point of this? What's the point of a student with a visual impairment learning this skill? Why should they have access to PE? They already do orientation mobility. They're walking with their cane, their guide dog. So they're walking. They don't need access to PE. Or safety. I don't want this person to get hurt. I don't want this person to experience failure. So I'm not going to include them. I shouldn't have to include them.
And I'll just tag on with that of a factor that is unfortunate, particularly with kids, is sometimes there's a lot of fear, even from the parents' point of view or from the organization's view, about the risk of someone getting hurt. In that fact, and the data that we have on that says that those fears are largely unfounded, and that kids with disabilities aren't at any greater risk for getting hurt in a physical activity environment. But that fear certainly persists on both sides, from the family and from the organizations or the schools that are trying to run these programs, if they are available.
And would you like to add anything? Okay, great, thank you, thank you. Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm hearing that it's much more of a structural issue, really, that's creating this barrier. going off of this, what do you see as some of the benefits as well as some of the challenges to inclusion of all students in PE or physical movement-based settings? And Anne, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to pick on you.
Well, my first thought would be that it is the teachers at the leaders' frame of mind, that it can't happen, and that we need to have high expectations for all of our children. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but you think about that invisible disability, and so I think that that's a hard thing sometimes, because people don't. It's just hard to wrap your mind around it, right? You look at Cody, you can see his Down syndrome, and then people may say, "Oh, well, he won't be." I can remember when he was little. Oh, he won't be able to jump rope, and then I went to his school one day and he's out there on the playground and he's jump roping. So it was on me that I was thinking, oh, he can't. And so how can we be creative? What kind of things can we do that will break down those barriers so that all kids can be involved in PE classrooms? For instance, at my school, all of our kids are involved in PE.
Kirsten, go ahead.
It's incredibly important to remember that PE is a direct service. So it is the right that every student has access to it. It is not something that is added on, something that is, well, they have to test into it, they have to show an ability. No, this has been determined by the federal government that this is a right that every student has access to in their least restrictive environment, and that they have the same access as their peers. And as we get pushback from, oh, this is too hard to do, that, oh, this is something that, what's the point of it? We've determined that this is something that is necessary for all students. And if we've determined it's necessary for all students, then that includes that it's necessary for students with disabilities. I love that Anne brought up the example of jumping rope. I have a student that I have worked with for a number of years, and he would self-describe himself as, I'm not really a sports guy. When he was in kindergarten, all of his peers were learning how to jump rope. His teacher reached out to me of, how do we break down jumping rope? We talked about it, and she borrowed some equipment. We talked about how you can break down each step. That skill increased and continued to increase. A couple years later, she reached out. It's working great. He's jumping rope, same as all of his peers. They're enjoying it. Now he is finishing up elementary and middle school, finally came to camp for the first time. And again, still would self-describe himself as, I'm not really a sports guy. However, when he comes to camp, he's at a pretty middle level as his peers, of someone who's like, I don't really like sports, but his skills are right middle of all of his peers. Additionally, his stamina and his abilities for orientation, mobility, and his cane skills are incredibly high, because he has the stamina, he has the physical knowledge, the body awareness, and he's applying that to all other areas. And this is because he's been fully included in PE and has had an instructor that says, hey, I might teach it a little differently, I might break it down a little bit differently, but I'm teaching this skill to all of the students, and it's important for all students for a reason.
That's really interesting, seeing that benefit of this, very, what would be considered mundane, just jumping rope skill, actually is incredibly important for this student. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Andrew or Megan, would you like to weigh in on some benefits or challenges?
Go for it, Andy.
Okay, I was waiting for you to go first. I think so. In flipping to the other side, we do know that there are a number of the benefits, and some of the things that have been shown. Again, I'm a very data-oriented research person, so but the data clearly shows that when we have students with a range of disabilities included in physical education, there's more a social interaction, and actually their physical activity levels tend to be higher in that more inclusive setting than in a segregated setting. So it's it can be a more effective form of education for these students if it's done properly. And I really think that social inclusion, the social communication aspect has the ability to benefit everyone involved, including children without disabilities who are now interacting with people that have differences from them. And it's important to interact with a variety of people through education. I think that is an opportunity that exists through inclusive physical education.
Yeah, and to add to that, Andy, it also there's the modeling of the typical developing peers. So, at Bike First, someone's disability might be extreme fear of falling. And halfway through the week, we have typical developing students come and they do that modeling. And I think that it breaks down the fear factor, because often we can look at someone and panic because we can see their disability. And so kids are growing up where we all have disabilities. We all have something that's going on with us. And so it just makes them more open, I think. And another thing that we've noticed at Bike First, that when students learn different skills to learn how to ride the bike, like Megan was talking about, first you have to learn this, and then you learn, all of these, or maybe it was Kirsten, but the little skills that go up to just getting on a bike. Can you steer? Can you put your leg over? Can you move your legs? All of those kind of things bring this feeling of success. And so that natural dopamine builds up in their bodies. And then they go home and all of a sudden they want to dress themselves and they want to choose what they want to eat for dinner. And they start building this extreme independence. And we have families who contact us and say, you're not going to believe what happened this morning. And it's breathtaking.
I think I was going to share a lot of the same in respect to, the benefits and transferable skills. So skills that we learn in PE, we transfer to other places. I liked Kirsten's example of the jump rope. I often use Foursquare. And sort of the playground for kids is like a social world. So knowing how to play the games that are taking place on the playground, and sort of the combination of those skills that go together, like the functional skills, the social skills that I think we're all bringing up. Coming back to the other part of this question, the challenges, I also want to hop back to something that Kirsten said, and it's about a child's right to physical education. And I'm not sure how often this has been brought up within this group, but physical education is a direct service. It gets confused consistently with being an indirect service, and it is not. And then Section 504 also protects students from extracurricular activities too. So if an extracurricular activity is being offered at a school for all students, that absolutely includes students with disabilities too. And I think some new clarification or I have to double check the date on this, and I can put some links in, is that physical education cannot be substituted with PE, okay, physical education, PE, sure, that makes sense, but PT, OT, all of these other things. And I'm consistently surprised that this comes up over and over and over and over again with the families that we work with. But I have some documents and I'm happy to share them with Emily, where this is very clearly documented. And often it's we are educating, or families are educating the schools on some of these rights. And so for me, that's a challenge. That would be a challenge, that the school is not always educated to the extent necessary in order to ensure that these laws are upheld.
To follow up on that, there was a question in the chat of what is the difference between a direct and an indirect service. So under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, what most of us call IDEA, there are services that are defined as being direct, and those are most commonly your core academic subjects. So what would occur related to the general curriculum of those. Included in that, though, is that special education includes physical education, and it can include education that occurs in a variety of settings. So it's not just restricted to what's happening in schools. If that needs to take place in a hospital or in some kind of other care facilities, special education extends out to those. Indirect services are then a list that are not necessarily core academic areas, but are areas that are there to support the educational process. So that can, in this area, can relate to having physical therapy or occupational therapy. For someone with visual impairment, that could include mobility and orientation services, or even something that we think of as simple as transportation to and from school. It can be an indirect service that is offered to enable that child to be able to fully participate in their education. So the distinction is important because it's important because a lot of people don't know about it, but it's also important because it's the one place where it says physical education is essentially equivalent to any other academic area within that at school. And I think most people don't recognize that. And even talking to people who are specialists in special education, they don't always interpret the law quite the same way. And it's important to have them on our side as well.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. I was about to ask that, so I'm glad you're looking at the chat as well. I also wanted to call out a comment here from Julia Sanders. I just feel like this is really important to remember. They say, I wanted to add that when we look at disability using the social model, we must consider what about the environment is disabling for these students. These disabling factors are often barriers for students without disabilities as well. When we make adjustments to accommodate our students with disabilities, everyone benefits. I just thought that was really great. I agree too. There's disabling environments and we need to be thinking about those.
This is Kirsten. Can I say something really quick on that? Because I'm so glad that you shared that, because it's also an opportunity for us to think about PE differently. So oftentimes we're expecting students and people with disabilities to fit into the non-disabled world, someone visually impaired to fit into the sighted world, someone with this disability to fit in this world. But it's an opportunity for us to think about things differently. What if I do this differently? Then everybody's also able to access this, but it's already created accessibly. It's something as simple as when we think about how our world is structured, that curb cuts were added for people who use wheelchairs, but everybody who was wheeling something or carrying something heavy was excited there was a curb cut there because they didn't have to pick up whatever they were carrying, wheeling to get onto that. But that's just naturally in the environment. Same as when we think about PE, let's say we're teaching a skill of passing and receiving with your hands. We automatically think basketball, that has to be done in a basketball skill, in a basketball game. But we can do that differently. We could say, let's do this activity. It's created accessible for the needs of my individual students, whether that is they are blind, there's an intellectual disability, it is trauma, there's something in the background, but we're doing it this way, but I'm still measuring that skill. I'm doing it differently, but it's accessible to everyone. I'm not just making this little change that hopefully everyone can access.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to move us along here. I'm loving this conversation and this flow, but I still have a lot of questions to go through. A lot of the folks on this call are safe routes to school coordinators or work in PE settings, other physical movement-based settings. So we want to get some thoughts from all of you on what are some of the main considerations that coordinators, PE teachers, people working with students with disabilities should take when they're creating adaptive curriculum or programming. And Megan, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, in thinking about this question, so a few things. I think I also teach in the program that Andy shared, the Master of Adaptive Physical Education. So we're training teachers who are going to be going out, and some physical educators, some adaptive physical educators. And the first class, you know, I always remember like, okay, what do you want to take away from this class? I want to know what to do. I'm like, well, we're going to talk about that throughout the course of your entire curriculum, but there's not one perfect accommodation. There are, I think that, you know, you are the experts in PE and in your programming. And I think really being creative and talking to students and learning from them and their families and their communities, and really thinking around, you know, being creative with your accommodations. I think seeking out resources, so getting to know students and then finding out what other resources might be available for those specific accommodations. And then especially in many cases, in all cases, you know, really communicating with those students to find out what's important to them. And oftentimes they know the accommodation that will work best for them as well. And I really think a first step in including all students is just having an inclusive attitude, and thinking through that a little bit. If we're specifically talking about biking and teaching, I mean, it's like anyone learning to in this case, like ride a bike. We're all at different skill levels and places, and so I think that we could give some specifics there that I'd be happy to talk about, but it's kind of that same general principle, is kind of starting where the student's at. So I'll pass off to someone else.
Whoever wants to go next.
I can go. Oh. Our big challenge right now is just trying to create curriculum for our intensive skills classroom students in Beaverton. So far, they've been kind of left out of our pedestrian education program, which I really want to change that. But a lot of the teachers have given the feedback that they don't really know how they would access that curriculum. So I'm just trying to think of any creative way to teach that content to these kids, because I feel like they're the most vulnerable population of pedestrians in a lot of ways. So even if they're not able to access it, I still want to try to find whatever way possible to get them as familiar with some of these concepts so that they can be safe. Yeah. And does anyone else want to go next?
Kirsten, you were about to unmute, and so yes, I was going to see if you have thoughts or response.
Yeah, this is Kirsten speaking, and it is just, even as Megan said, use your resources and also ask those students. That something that I know that Bridget had mentioned in the comments was sometimes, a lot of times it's a barrier of knowing, do you have an APE specialist in the district? Do you have a teacher of the visually impaired? Do you have who are those professionals that are on that student's IEP educational team? And reach out to those resources. Reach out to, how does the student access information in any environment? Is there, and because I work with people who are blind and visually impaired, I am looking specifically through that lens, but this lens does apply to all disabilities of, is there a specific medium that this needs to be in? Is it Braille? Is it large print? Is it electronic? Do I need to add pictures? Are we simplifying the language? Are we structuring it differently? Do I need to make it into a social story? What information is going to be helpful, and how does this person access other information? And especially, so oftentimes we overlook asking that student. It can be really common to say, I don't know what this person needs. What does this person need? What does this person need? I know for myself, as someone who's blind, I've had people come up to me and say, I don't know how to help you. And first of all, you haven't asked if I need any help, because the answer right now is, I do not need anything. But if someone said, do you need any help? Is there anything I can do to help you? That's a different question. And that includes to that student. We're doing this sport. We're doing this activity. Here is the plan. Here are my thoughts. Is this going to work for you? Is there a way that I can access it? And also knowing that that answer might at that point be, I don't need anything now, but that answer might change, and continually checking in, because all of us, no matter our background, we don't always know what we need in that moment. But as we get to know that situation more, we can express that more of, I now have this question. I now have this concern. I now need some clarification. And that open communication is essential throughout all areas.
This is Anne talking. Kirsten, I really appreciate that. I think what you're talking about is what we do at Bike First, where we're trying to look at things from all angles, and that it's so important that all of you in the audience and all of us, that we're doing things as a team, and that we're not just trying to do it alone. Because I will look at my leaders, and some of them are in high school, and some of them are, you know, older, and some are younger, and they come up with the most creative ways to get someone on a bike. Oh, let's use this pillow. Oh, let's put this strap around them. Okay, on the count of 3, let's start singing. And they pedal to the beat of the music as they're going around. And so it does take collaboration and high creativity.
I would agree.
Go ahead.
Sorry, this is Andy speaking. I agree. I think the theme here is creativity, in that it takes thought, it takes effort. One thing though, to go back and even think about the premise of this question of how do we adapt curriculum for people with a variety of needs, and something to think about. I think it was even mentioned in the chat. There's I guess I'll call it a framework called a universal design for learning, where we're, instead of taking something that was designed for the general population and adapting it to fit the needs of an individual person or a particular group, we can design things to be to have multiple ways that people can experience it, to interact with it, to engage with it. And if we think about things from the beginning, we often don't have to go back later and adapt it. So for the question, I don't know the specific program in Beaverton offhand, but thinking about different modes or different ways that information could be presented to children, with, depending on what their specific needs might be. It might have to be a curriculum that is given in a more verbal way. It might need to be something that is experienced through actually going out and walking on the sidewalk, walking across streets. So just think about different ways that that same information can be given out to students. And unfortunately, some of this is a trial and error, and that's okay. You have to try things, see if they work, and if they don't, you try something else until something does hit. And even though we want to have as little of that error as possible, sometimes we do have to try and error to find the right solution.
Thank you. Thank you all for that, and for specifically speaking to the Beaverton scenario as well here. This kind of leads into the next portion of this question, specifically around Safe Routes to School programming. We have this program called Jumpstart, where we teach bike and pedestrian safety education, specifically around adaptive bike lessons, wanting to be sure that all students are included. What, in your experience, would be good staff members at a school to be contacting to make sure that those students are being involved? And Andrew, you're shaking your head, so I'm going to go to you.
Well, so my experience in this area, much like Megan's, actually through the same camp, we were part of a research lab that used the I Can Shine bike program, and we're testing the effectiveness of that. And we had college students as our one-on-one aides. Not everyone is going to have access to college students to do that. But I think the characteristics that you want out of a good assistant is someone who is invested in being there, someone that can be creative in the moment, and someone that has the temperament to deal with challenges and overcome them, because there are going to be different challenges that come up, and it's the same working with any child. So the more the older the assistant, sometimes the better within reason. But I think the biggest thing is the attitude of those individuals.
Megan, yes, you already unmuted. Thank you.
I already unmuted. Yeah, I was going to add, I think Andy did a really nice job there. And so I think even volunteers within the community that meet a lot of those attributes. It's been a long time since I've done that camp, but I would also have someone that can run, because the kids are very, they become quite good very quickly. And so, which is great, a lot of independence there, but I think I did a lot of running in those weeks, which was awesome. Also a lot of fun. And I think also in many ways, someone who all of those attributes, but understanding the process for learning as well. And so obviously that's different in everyone, as we've talked about. One of the really unique things when we think about this motorically is like what you learn first. And so learning, you know, okay, rather than I'm going to learn how to put the kickstand up on my bike, I'm going to learn how to brake, I'm going to learn like different speeds. First, let's just learn to pedal. Like let's practice on that before we throw in all of these other components. Then let's, like, once we get that going, let's learn to put the kickstand down so that we don't break our bike if it kind of falls over. And then thinking about things like hand brakes over backpedaling, that's a very different skill set to learn. So those are some things that can be really helpful. And then other things when, and I'm sure many of you know this, but when I bike, I like my bike to be fitted a certain way. And if I were to go down to the bike shop, they're going to tell me where the seat should be and like where the handlebar should be. And what a student needs might not look the same. And that's for a lot of reasons, like flat-footed, so that they can put their feet down if they need to stop. And so some of those ergonomically correct features that eventually might pop up later as someone's learning aren't necessarily something that we need to focus on right now too. So I've kind of, sorry, I think I've moved away a little bit from the question, but someone who understands that, who also understands the process and place where we're coming in terms of teaching too.
This is Anne talking. To take off from what Megan said, what we do is kind of the opposite of what a bike shop would tell people to do. So when they go and they purchase a bike, they sit on the seat and their feet need to be flat on the ground, number one. We want them sitting upright. We want them to have the foot forward versus the foot under mentality. So a lot of times the bikes, a good example would be like the Electra bike is really good because they're pedaling like this, which is easier. So those just a few things that I was thinking about. I have families take their kids to the grocery store shopping and they push the basket, and I tell them, go ahead and let them run into things because they need to learn to steer it. Yeah.
Also, as we think about this, of thinking that each disability is different, and what works for one won't work for another person with a different disability, or even, and Megan touched on this a little bit ago, of there isn't a one size fits all even within one specific disability, that it's what my vision looks like is different than someone else's, what I need is different than someone else's. And working with those other individuals on that person's IEP team and others who are, hey, this is a group that specifically knows about teaching biking, teaching adaptive sports to blank. I should reach out to these community partners. I should reach out to these community partners because that can offer information about what's going to be helpful for this individual. Here's the background of the student, what's going to be helpful. That when thinking about teaching biking to someone who is blind, knowing that their peers all have a concept of a bike because that person's seen a bike. We know a general, here's how you sit on a bike because I've seen that information. But someone who's blind doesn't necessarily have that information. So we need to start with orienting to the bike. And we need to start with this information, that how we are, what bike we're using, what's going to be helpful is different for different people.
Thank you. Yes, I echo the reaching out to community partners that have the skills and expertise. I want to open it up to the audience. We won't get through all these questions, but that's fine. And I wanted to start with this question from Nora that I really, really love. What are some questions that Safe Routes practitioners can ask themselves to investigate internal bias or assumptions around disability and accessibility? And I'll let whoever wants to go first on that.
What's the point? Why are we teaching this? What's the point of teaching this? That a lot of times that question, though it seems really simple, can then give that answer of why do I think that this student can do it? Why do I think that this student needs this? Why? What have I done? What have I asked? What information have I automatically assumed and not first gotten that individual's perspective, or automatically exclude this person for a certain reason? The other thing that's important of why did I choose a volunteer? Did I just choose this person to be a tandem bike captain because their only qualification is that they're sighted? Because if that's the reason, then that's a bias that this person can ride a bike because they're sighted, this person's blind, so they can't. But I chose this person because they are a good biker, because they're a good instructor, because they have these other qualifications. Great. But some of those questions can really help to explore our perspective.
Megan, would you like to take that question next?
Yeah, thanks. I think I really just echo a lot of what Kirsten said. And was the question, I was just trying to find it, Nora, was it about breaking down barriers? Can you repeat the question, Emily?
Sorry, this one
thanks.
is about investigating internal bias and assumptions and what questions to be asking ourselves as we're doing this Safe Routes work.
Yeah, I think that Kirsten did a really nice job. And I think I go back to some of those things we've already talked about too, like talking to all students to find out where they're at and what their starting point is, right? And making that universal for all so that we're able to accommodate not only for students who may have a disability, but also for all of the students that are coming for this work as well.
And do you have anything that you'd like to add for things to reflect on? Oh, perfect. Okay. And Andy, I'll open that to you as well too, if you have anything you want to add.
I'm not sure this is answering the question of what to necessarily reflect on to think about bias, but in echoing what's already been said, I think one of the keys is to have intention. Why are you teaching a certain skill? Why are you doing a certain activity? Are we doing it because it's what has always been done? Or are we having, is there an intentive point to it? And really being critical of ourselves and what we're including in our lesson plans and curriculums, and especially when that applies to a student with a disability that might be engaging in that activity in a different way than other students in that class. So just having intention with that thought process.
I can give an example of that. At Bike First, we teach how to ride first, and then we teach them how to stop and start. We go from, you know, our adapted bikes that are brought up from California to a typical two-wheel bike to their bike. We bring them outside on a track, then have them practice riding and learning how to start and stop. And there are times where I will come out and I will look and I'll talk to a team and I'll say, okay, what is the skill that you're working on right now? Starting and stopping. Okay, well, what I'm watching you do is I'm watching you have them ride around and around the track. They already know how to do that. So stay focused on what it is that they are learning. What is the objective here for them? Cody, did you want to add anything about PE, about you in PE and you in coaching? What helped you?
Yeah, I still coaching for PE. This is my job. I'd be teaching, with the kids, play at recess. Asking the teachers to ask me as the teacher get the kids trouble, during a fight as the recess. They're pretty nice as when it gets ever.
I think also what really helped him in PE and when he's been doing other things are people using shorter sentences for him. So I think that a lot of times we can get very wordy, and really it could just be foot on pedal instead of, okay, you need to put your foot on the pedal and then we're going to do it, and keep going, right? What is it you want to say? Foot on pedal. And modeling is really huge, because I think that we tend to go towards our strongest learning style. So if we're an auditory person, we're going to be talking up a storm. But a lot of our kids are visual learners, and they just need to see it in order for them to learn it. And so that was pretty big. Anything else you wanted to share?
Yeah, just have to with the virtual bikes, add the bike first. Yes, we do have paddle. We have brakes in the bike. Just need to send the wheelers, holding the bikes, holding the paddle things. You can't by yourself. You just add wheelers to the captains. This is my mom. This shows as a bike first camp. You just be bike first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cody. I think we have time for maybe one or two audience questions. My wrap up of announcements shouldn't be too long. So if anyone wants to come off mic and ask a question, Sean, it does look like you have a question here about cargo tricycles. If you'd like to ask that.
Sure. Hi, this is Sean Martinez speaking. I work at Cycle Oregon in Portland. So I lead our bike bus in Tigard, and the last couple of years we've had a couple of students at our school that are using wheelchairs, and I've wondered how to include them in these longer distance events. And I've been looking at this. It's a cargo tricycle that can actually load a wheelchair into the bike. The student would be in their wheelchair, the whole wheelchair goes in and locks in, and then it folds up a little ramp, and then now they can participate in the like walk and roll to school or bike bus. Has anybody ever seen one of these or any experience with these? Kind of like a pedicab?
I haven't had any experience with them. Is anyone else?
I have not, and this is Kirsten speaking. And what we've found when working with one of our sessions at campus specifically for students with multiple disabilities, a lot of whom do use a wheelchair and have used a recumbent tandem bike. So it is a seat, and we add additional supports as that individual needs, and that when the pedals move in sync, that person is getting the full motion of tandem biking. They're adding additional power as needed. There are also hand cycle versions available if that's going to be most helpful for someone, so that they are getting the actual activity of biking in addition to the distance experience, which is helped by the captain.
This is Anne talking. One thing that I just thought of is that if you are, just in general terms, if you are hoping to get someone on a two-wheel bike, you typically don't start them on a tricycle, because then they'll have the preschool turn. And then what happens with us is we spend a day or two trying to break them of that sharp turn that they do on a tricycle. So it's something for the community out there to think about.
I assume that's similar to this movement to Strider bikes for teaching students how to, yes, you don't want them to be reliant on the training wheels or other wheels to balance.
And you can do that just by taking the pedals and the stems off a bike. So you don't have to buy the Strider bikes.
Great. Yes.
I think, Sean, the other thing that stands out to me in your point is sort of for many individuals who are also wheelchair users, it's that transport of their day chair, their wheelchair to school, and then the other bike or the other device that they're going to roll in to get to school. And I don't have a great answer for that. I'd be really curious around like what bikes might be easier to fit for more than one person. I know that wheelchairs, I think that's another thing that in PE is that many students use their day chair for PE, but I always envision, you know, an inclusive physical education room where we have multiple sport chairs that students could hop in or out of, depending on the activities that they're doing that day. And so that would just be something to consider depending on the students that you're working with for this program too.
With that, I just want to give each of our panelists maybe like 20 seconds here to share anything else that they would like to. And then after that, I'll go ahead and share some quick announcements and we'll wrap up. Andy, how about you? Start with you.
I don't have anything particular to share. I do want to say though, and I would like to interact with you more